Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, we're going to begin the funeral service of Mrs. Lilyan Elizabeth Muraff. Rabbi Wendy Geffen, the Senior Rabbi of North Shore Congregation Israel, will be officiating. We welcome those of you who are online and those of you who are here. We ask that you take a moment to be sure that your cellular phone has been turned off. In just a moment, the Rabbi will begin with the ceremony of Kriya.
Death has taken our beloved Lilyan, which is hard to understand or even come to accept because she was so full of life, so strong. And you know, as you, her family who are here with us know, she had any number of close calls in these past years, times when we didn't know if she was going to make it, but she always did. Fierce in that way. And so it is of note that in some respects we are surprised, even shocked, that Lilyan, someone 96 years old, has left us. And we grieve for that. And in our grief and in our loneliness, we pray, the family who's here prays, and all of those who are joined here in person or even virtually, all of those who love them, all of those who loved Lil, pray that you be comforted and consoled from community and from each other. For Lilyan's light that united us in life, in which death could never take away. For her companionship that we shared along life's path and which continues now through the tenderness of memory. For the many, many gifts of her heart and mind that brought joy, happiness, and are now precious remembrances. For all these and so much more, we give our thanks to God. And so it is in this time of grief that we turn to voices, both ancient and new, to guide us as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death together. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bino deshe yarbitzeni, ame menuchot yinahaleni, nafshi yeshovev, yancheni b'ma'ag le'tzedek l'ma'an shemo. These Hebrew words are the beginning words of the 23rd Psalm, a source of comfort and consolation to so many over so many years. You have the words written in English on the pamphlet you received when you came in just a few moments ago, or perhaps you know them. Either way, I'd invite you, whether you're here with us in person or streaming at home, if you know the words, to say them aloud as a sign of our connection to each other and our desire to comfort Lilyan's family. Let's join together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In so many ways, Lilyan lived the strength and faith of this psalm, never one to be stopped by a challenge, someone who always understood that her cup ran over, that life was always in front of her, a fitting tribute of her faith. From the book of Proverbs, Eshet chayil mi imtza v'rachok mipninin michra b'tach ba lev bala v'shalal lo yechsar. A woman of valor, who can find? She is precious in the gifts she has given to her family. Her children have found trust and truth in these gifts. She honors her husband with kindness always. We follow in the patterns she taught. She is robed in strength and dignity. She smiles at the future. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her lips. May she always be credited for the fruit of her labor and her achievements. May she live on in glory. Many daughters have done valiantly, but she has excelled them all. And from the book of Ecclesiastes, there is a time for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. And lastly, this poem by the poet Zelda, Each of Us Has a Name. Each of us has a name given by God and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our stature and our smile and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by the mountains and given by our walls. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given by our longing and given by our love. Each of us has a name given by our work and given by our celebrations. Each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our struggles. Each of us has a name given by the sea and given by our death. We are here today to remember a woman who really possessed a good name. In our tradition, a good name being the greatest legacy that one could pass on. We remember Lilyan, Lil. And we're here to reflect on her 96 very, very full years of life. Lilyan was a beloved daughter, wife, mother, and grandmother. She was a treasured cousin, caring friend. She was a woman whose adventurous spirit, strong will, and strength helped her forge a path of meaning and purpose in her life, one which really inspired those who knew her. There is, in truth, no way we could cover the full depth and breadth of Lilyan's life in our time together this afternoon, so we won't try to do that. But we will try to offer a few highlights to pay tribute to the one-of-a-kind person she was and the profound legacy she now leaves behind for us all. Lilyan was born to her parents, Lena Pearl and James New, on September 29, 1924, at Mary Yates Hospital in Port Arthur, Texas. Her first years of life took place there, but when Lilyan was 3, Lena Pearl and James broke up. Lena Pearl and Lilyan made their way to New Orleans as they had family there, and that's where Lena Pearl met and married Carl Elfenbaum, who Lilyan thought of and called her daddy, taking on the name Elfenbaum as well. Lilyan was always close with her parents, especially her mother. She also had meaningful relationships with extended family. The Steinberg cousins from Dallas were effectively Lilyan's siblings, and Lilyan would spend many summers with them while her mother accompanied Carl on his business trips. Lilyan also maintained a warm relationship with her half-brother, James New Jr., and his daughter, her half-niece as well. Lilyan was taught early on the value of helping people. During the Depression, anytime anyone knocked on the family home's door in need, Lena Pearl would make them something to eat. No one was ever turned away. The spirit of service became a key part of who Lilyan was. Whether volunteering as a nurse candy striper with the American Red Cross during World War II, making whatever charitable donations she could really throughout her entire life, or offering quiet support and care to anyone who she thought she could help, Lilyan lived the value of helping and giving back. At Sophie B. Wright High School for Girls, Lilyan attended school, and she was a notably good student. In addition, she was involved in acting troupes and plays. She participated in Young Judea and Junior Hadassah, attended Brandeis Camp in the Poconos. She was always active and involved. After high school, she went on to Newcomb into a 2-year associate's degree program for secretarial work and office management. There were summers working in the Blue Ridge Mountains at Blue Star Camp as well. But at a certain point, life in the South became stifling for Lilyan. Her independent spirit took her north then to Cincinnati, where she worked at Hebrew Union College. Always ahead of the time in her thinking, it was exciting to be at a new place of study with a modern approach. Lilyan met many of the leading scholars and theologians of the time while she was there. It was there she also met the man who would become Rabbi, Herbert Bronstein, the rabbi of our synagogue in North Shore Congregation Israel, when she came here, a synagogue at which she has remained literally more than half a century. All of us, I speak on our behalf, feel lucky to have served as one of her rabbis. After Cincinnati, Lilyan moved to Chicago as she was seeking a bigger city and wanted to experience something new again. It was here in Chicago that Lilyan would really make her home, building a notably full life for herself, professionally and personally, and somehow managing to maintain both. Over the years, Lilyan had a number of jobs across a number of industries. A few highlights: working in the financial industry and stock brokerage firms, working for Stanley Korshak, where she would get to present his new designs to their Michigan Avenue clientele. Lilyan worked for the JCC for over 20 years, something she really loved as it allowed her to raise her children and work at the same time. And eventually, she worked for both a labor arbitrator as a legal secretary as well as an office manager for Lustbader and Ruskin, where she really made everything happen. Finally, she worked for Jeff Bondi at Litigators Incorporated, helping mesothelioma victims, work she felt was very important. She continued to work there until she was 86 years old, literally until she could not walk anymore. But let's travel back for a moment in time to when Bernie entered Lilyan's life. Legend has it that Bernie actually went out with one of Lilyan's friends first, but when that didn't work out, the friend thought that Lilyan might like him. She was right. They hit it off, their courtship was fast, and they were married only 3 or 4 months later in August of 1962. They first lived on Chase Avenue in West Rogers Park and eventually made their way to Northbrook, where they built the house at 1930 Western Ave, the house where Lilyan would remain for the rest of her life. Together, Lilyan and Bernie shared a deep connection. Bernie had served in World War II, and that value of service to country was something so important to Lil. Lilyan also loved how Bernie's work at Children and Family Services was rooted around giving back and improving people's lives. The couple was about values, and really they were about their family. When they socialized, they did so with cousins and extended family, and all the other time they spent with their children. Later in life, they bought a place in Boynton Beach where they were able to spend time, and that brought them great joy. As a mother, Lilyan had unique relationships with Laura, Barry, and Jim, but she was devoted to each of them in their lives. Again, while working, Lilyan somehow managed to be a Brownie and Cub Scout leader, a member of the PTO, involved in the band parents organizations. She went to every skating show, music performance, what have you. Notably supportive of each of their interests, Lilyan was always there and wanted for each of them to be able to be the very best of themselves. Something she carried on with her grandchildren. As a grandmother, Grandma Lily was very supportive and involved in Jeremy, Rebecca, Bryn, and Drew's lives. She came to every game, concert, celebration, confirmation, what have you. She could be tough, but in a loving way, and she always let them know that she loved them. Lilyan was strong in every sense of the word, in everything she did or went through. When Bernie suffered a stroke, Lilyan was his devoted caretaker while still working full-time. When Bernie passed away in 1996, Lilyan was devastated, but she pushed through. A child of the Depression and a member of the greatest generation, Lilyan knew how to get through challenges and navigate change, and she was not someone to ever dwell on the past or complain. She was accepting and forward-thinking, always looking to what was next, and she inspired others with that attitude. Undoubtedly, the presence and care of Agnes and her family over these last 8 years proved a real blessing for Lilyan, just as we know Lilyan proved a blessing in your life too. Lilyan was a unique person, and we will remember her for so many of her noteworthy characteristics that made her the one-of-a-kind person she was. She was beautiful, prim, proper, but she had a spirit of adventure, something that put her well ahead of her time. She was humble and empathetic. She never said no, and she was generous, giving back whatever she could whenever she could. She was a hard worker, resilient, determined, and strong-willed. Indeed, there are countless many who will remember and carry Lilyan and the lessons of her life with them as a guide for their own lives. Zichrona livracha. May Lilyan's memory always be for a blessing. We'll hear now from a few different family members. So I think first we're hearing from Jim.
Rabbi Geffen, Wendy, I just want to start by thanking you for your words about Mom and for capturing her path so very well. We greatly appreciate your wisdom and guidance, especially today. Hello to all of you over the streaming live feed that have decided to take the time out of your busy day to be with us in order to celebrate Lilyan's life. I suspect many of you are watching locally and from distant locations: Florida, Texas, California, New York, New Jersey, Ohio, Michigan, Arizona, Louisiana, New Mexico, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere. One of the hardest things about the timing of Mom's passing is the inability to connect with each other on a human face-to-face level. We would have loved to get together with each of you in person and look forward to doing so in the future. I also want to thank each and every one of you that reached out to our family by phone, by text, by Facebook, and by other electronic means. Your words of encouragement are a great source of strength to all of us, especially the stories and references that bring back specific memories of our mother, whether fun or otherwise. We all greatly appreciate that source of strength that you've given to us. Now, before I make the following attempt to properly honor our mother, I must also provide the following caveat, as many lawyers would do, but which is appropriate here. There is just no way that my words will do justice to Lilyan and her life. That would be impossible given how long she lived, the number of experiences she had, and more importantly, the number of people she met and affected throughout her life. All I can really do here is give you a glimpse, and for many of you, remind you of who she was as a person and provide a few examples along the way. Mom went by several names. Of course, Lilyan. Many called her Lil, which is what my father, Bernie, used for her. If you knew her when she was much younger, especially growing up in the South, the name Betty applied, being a form of her middle name, Elizabeth. And she also decided late in life to call herself Grandma Lily, or just Lily, instead of the commonly used linguistic or regional terms such as Savta, Bubby, or Nana. This self-naming of Grandma Lily during this later phase in her life, which was somewhat different than many Jewish grandmothers would use, was telling to me that she was always willing to do something different and in the way she wanted to do it. In a bigger picture context, she just took her own path and did not fret about what others thought. This applied to many facets of her life, as I will explain more in a few minutes. In honoring Mom, there are a few great traits of hers I want to point out. First, she always showed a consistent mental strength no matter how daunting the circumstances, such as when my father had a stroke, was paralyzed on one side, and she took care of him while at the same time continuing to work to sustain them, as the rabbi mentioned. Or how about when our entire family was in a bad car accident in Minnesota, we're stuck in a hotel room with rainy weather for 4 days while the car got fixed, and Laura stepped on a needle and had to have surgery to remove it, all in the same trip. These are just a few examples of how she stayed strong and kept things positive for all of us in adverse circumstances. Some of this mental strength just took the form of plain old hard work. If finances were tough, which happened from time to time, she would go out and get a second job working on Saturdays as a legal secretary. She also studied for and got her real estate license to make some extra money on the side of her regular secretarial office manager 9-to-5 job. She enjoyed trying new things, even though she was fairly conservative, having grown up in the Deep South and during the Great Depression. In effect, instead of succumbing to fear or not having enough confidence, she had the mental strength to just do whatever it took to make a nice life for herself and for her family. This allowed us kids and our family as a whole to do many extracurricular things and to experience life more fully. Both Mom and Dad shared this strong work ethic, but it was Mom that always had a bit more mental toughness than Dad, even though Dad played high school football and some college football. Mom also had a get involved and try new things attitude. Whether because she enjoyed interacting with others and being a part of community because it added to the spices of life, or just because it was the right thing to do when it came to charitable involvement, she was just consistently involved with social and community causes. At a young age, she was very involved with what we call today B'nai B'rith. She was also involved with the American Red Cross during World War II, volunteering for the war effort, as well as attending GI social events. As Dad was a World War II Navy veteran, Mom and Dad also shared a strong sense of patriotism. Mom also traveled to Israel with a Jewish social group in 1955 when she was in her early 30s via boat sailing from the United States. Her work at the Hebrew Union College and the Jewish community centers in Chicago for over 25 years also showed her commitment to being Jewish and the Jewish community as a whole. Mom and Dad also attended the reunion of Dad's World War II Navy ship, the destroyer escort USS Inch, almost every year. They also hosted the reunion in the 1990s, arranging all accommodations and a private visit to the German submarine at the Museum of Science and Industry. Mom also strongly promoted us kids being involved in many ways. Involvement to Mom was a very diverse concept. She had us involved in temple youth groups, B'nai B'rith, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, organized and competitive speed skating, figure skating, ice hockey teams, swim teams, gymnastics, football teams, baseball teams, basketball teams, track and field, and horseback riding, among others, as well as marching band, jazz band, choir, show choir, theater, plays, student government, snow skiing clubs, and even very loud rock and roll bands where the practices took place in our basement for me and my brother. I am exhausted just thinking about how much Mom had us involved as kids, but we all loved it. Not only did she get us involved with these things, but she jumped right in there with us. She was also a Cub Scout troop mom, a Girl Scout troop mom, involved in the PTA, a part of the band parents organization for many years, just to name a few. And Mom and Dad were also avid fans and showed their support for all of us during these many seasons of sports and activities. But Mom was usually leading the charge with signups and being involved. To show her support for being involved and to assist in keeping us interested, she would also, for example, drive us and go with us to events such as 20,000-person UFO concerts at the old Chicago Amphitheater and the Jane Byrne Chicago Fest for several years, where bands like the Doobie Brothers would attract large standing room only crowds with her 3 kids. We were right there in the middle of these types of events with Mom at fairly young ages, and she was already in her mid-50s at this point in time. Involvement and participation was one of her themes, and it certainly became a family theme. And whether we had to buy used sporting equipment or use musical equipment to make it happen, while she and Dad worked extra jobs to allow us to do these things, somehow she and Dad made it work and made it happen. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Relating to Mom's involvement trait was also her sense of adventure trait, as already suggested with her trip to Israel via boat and attendance at rock and roll concerts with us kids. But it goes much further. When other families in the area were taking run-of-the-mill airplane trips to warm locations over school breaks, Mom and Dad instead bought a pop-up camper, attached it to the back of a large station wagon, and set out on road trips each year for 3 weeks in August, just prior to school starting back up, with Lauren Barry in the back seat and me and the dog, Frisky, in the way back. A scene right out of that 70s show, no question. We would stop at various KOA and other campgrounds along the way, sometimes staying several days in one place if there was something interesting historically or sights to be seen, such as Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, Lookout Mountain in Georgia, Disney World in Florida, or just camping at a state park on the Gulf of Mexico while enjoying the beach and checking out the local town and its family restaurants. We would end up seeing just about everything there is to see along the way. Mom's sense of adventure was considerable, and we all got the benefit of it. I do need to mention, though, that whenever an activity involved heights that were 10 feet or more above the ground, it was Dad's turn to take care of us. Fear of heights was the one piece of kryptonite to our adventurous supermom. Even later in life, after Dad passed away, Mom decided to go on many elder hostel trips to the Southwest and elsewhere on her own. That sense of adventure just continued on, and even when she could no longer get around as easily because of her bad knees, she still traveled with our help to extended family reunions in Dallas and Austin on several occasions. Another important trait of Mom's was keeping in touch with and socializing with family, and that included extended family. While Mom and Dad did not have any siblings except for Mom's half-brother in Texas, Mom and Dad had many cousins, although mostly dads in Chicago. The Millers, the Wiles, the Shermans, the Blocks, and others. There were regular card games and sporting event viewings with extended family, sometimes hosted at our house, as well as life events with extended family, and Mom just loved a good get-together. When Mom and Dad retired and bought a home in Florida, they were able to continue to visit with extended family there as well, which was a great sense of family to them. Mom also exchanged letters and phone calls with her half-brother and cousins in Texas, as well as her aunt and uncle in New Orleans, on a fairly regular basis. And we would all visit with these extended family members when we could. Mom enjoyed the written letter form of communication with family, and even with pen pals through pen pal clubs with others in foreign countries, some of whom she ended up hosting at our house from time to time. And when grandchildren came into the picture, her attention shifted and was focused on them. Mom went to all of Jeremy's, Rebecca's, Bryn's, and even a few of Drew's events, and loved giving them gifts focused on their interests and their wishes. Mom also had the kindness trait. She always asked other people about what they were doing, what was going on with them first. She never talked about herself. The focus was about the other person. This was true with all of her interactions with others, whether in her involvement with community groups, school, or activity parent groups, or with extended family. And when someone had a problem or was in some form of pain, she was always empathetic, yet supportive and objective at the same time. She often modified or adjusted her approach, modulating from empathetic to constructive criticism, depending on how much constructive advice the person she was talking to could take from her perspective. On a personal note, I think Mom thought I could take a lot, as I usually got, "How come you did not get an A instead of an A-?" Or, "Why didn't you invent Microsoft Windows?" This was likely because our grandmother, Lena Pearl, lived with us growing up, and Pearl was certainly the good cop, for me at least. Mom adjusted her approach to be the bad cop from time to time with me, but only doing so knowing well that there was a good cop present. But most others got a modified approach and much more of an empathetic interaction from her, adjusted for that particular person. And before Mom's health deteriorated, she loved to give hugs. Mom's kindness trait also applied to her love of animals. She always had at least one dog and sometimes also one or even many cats in the house. She always fed her pets first, before herself, and she was always empathetic to and tried to minimize their pain as these animals aged. Mom also had several sayings that I would now call Lil-isms. Mom loved the phrase TGIF, which is probably what she's saying to Dad right now. She also used many others, such as God helps those who help themselves, and cleanliness is close to godliness. I think her favorite was, make yourself useful, not just ornamental. Or was it, There is no maid service around here. Returning back to Mom's toughness and mental strength, Mom never complained. I remember when she fell on some ice outside her house and broke her wrist and her shoulder and walked around with a wrist brace and pins in her shoulder for about 2 months. I don't think I remember a single complaint out of her about it. And in her last several years, months, and even days, she did not falter from this theme of mental strength. It was only the physical inevitability of the human body, not any mental strength failure, which caused her to pass. Mom, I love you, and I miss you already. You have touched many, and your spirit will live on through these and many other memories we have of you. And I do want to say one more thing. I cannot finish here today without thanking a very important person in this room. Agnes was Mom's full-time, 24/7 caregiver over the last 8 years. And she allowed Mom to stay in a familiar environment, the home that Mom raised us in. Mom would never have been with us this long without the fantastic care that Agnes provided, and also, as I would put it, the yin and yang interactions that they had on a daily basis. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Agnes, so much for everything you've done for Mom. It will never be forgotten.
That should work. Yeah. All right. So I wrote a speech. I'm probably going to ad-lib a little bit, so just bear with me as we go through that. But for everyone who's watching online at home, my name is Jeremy Lilyan, and Grandma Lily was, well, my grandma. So as Rabbi Geffen and Jimmy and probably a few other people were going to note, Grandma Lily was was a member of a generation called the Greatest Generation. And for those of you who don't know history or don't know anything about that, the Greatest Generation is the same generation that survived the Depression, that fought in World War II, that beat fascism. They established the State of Israel. They pushed back communism, and they built the world that we know and we live in today. So it's pretty impressive when you think about it. She really was a member of that generation in every aspect of her life, both metaphorically and literally in some of these extents. As Jimmy and Rabbi Geffen noted, she was a child of the Depression and grew up in New Orleans. Her and her mother would always welcome those into her house that knocked on the door begging for food. They would sit her down, the people who were begging, they would come inside and they would offer them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a glass of apple juice and send them on their way, exemplifying what it meant to be Jews for strangers in the strange land and for people who needed help and needed support during it. During World War II, she was a volunteer nurse in New Orleans. When all the doctors and nurses were fighting in the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, it was her that stepped up, that decided to volunteer and help her local community. In addition to that, as Jimmy noted, she always made sure to see all the soldiers off that went off to the battlefields and to the beaches of Normandy, and made sure they were always welcome when they came back to greet them and to say hi. Not sure if even most of the people in this room know this, but she was actually in New York City on VJ Day, the famous photo with the sailor and the nurse kissing. I don't believe she was in Times Square, but she had told me that at one point in the last few years. After the war, fulfilling more of her Greatest Generation philosophy, she ended up working at the University of Cincinnati, where she did her part to help build the Reformed Jewish community that is what we know as today. She eventually traveled by boat to Israel, which is pretty crazy to imagine if you think about how long of a trip that would be, partially to see Israel as it had just become a new state and a new country, and to take membership in it. She moved to Chicago, where she continued to work full-time until she was 86, which for a woman in the 50s is quite impressive, and to work till you're 86 is quite impressive in and of itself. All the while raising 3 children to become successful individuals in their own rights, with their own families, friends, and spiritual communities. And as Jimmy noted, involved in almost every single aspect of their lives, whether it was band or brownies or gymnastics or whatever activity it might have been. Even as she went into her 70s and 80s, she took a very involved role in my life, in my sister's life, and Bryn and even in Drew's life as much as she could at that point, driving us to school from time to time when it needed to be, or picking me up from basketball practice, or dropping off my sister at ballet. This was all the while she remained a dedicated wife to my grandfather, Bernie Muraff, for over 35 years until his passing, eventually never even remarrying afterwards. In this way, she also was a traditional woman, as very distinctly I remember growing up, making sure all the flatware was at the right spot to the Rosh Hashanah table, making sure it was all in place. However, what I do want to say is that these are all impressive qualities for someone who survived the Depression and volunteered during World War II and did her part with the Jewish community and raising a successful family. What I personally think is interesting about my grandmother and her story is not these moments that I've just mentioned and others have talked about, but it's some of the little details that are between the lines that some might say are imperfections. What I find is the fun, juicy stuff about a person's life. For example, she did send off all the soldiers before they left for Europe or the Pacific by attending some of these social events in New Orleans. What she didn't say, up until about a few years ago, she kind of made an offhanded remark in one of her moments where her memory was not as good, that it was more than just a dance or even a kiss on the cheek that was engaged in for sending them off. When I asked her why that was what she was doing, she said she needed to make sure the soldiers remembered what they were fighting for and who they were fighting for. She did play a role in Reform Judaism at the University of Cincinnati, as Rabbi Geffen mentioned, meeting Rabbi Bronstein, who she ended up joining the synagogue with later in time. And she was part of the State of Israel's founding by visiting as being one of the first tourists. But this wasn't as some major theologian or diplomat or builder, but just a secretary helping out and just a tourist trying to pay her respects and be involved in where she could. She did raise 3 children to become successful individuals, but sometimes it came after cracking a whip, as Jimmy pointed out. There are plenty of examples I could go through. Jimmy raised a bunch. I'll throw in a few more that I've heard about, like the time Jimmy decided to ride over someone else's lawn with some sort of motorbike and ruin the whole new grass, or the time my mom threw a party that got a little too loud while Jimmy was away on his hockey tournaments. She was always willing to even express that sense of correctness, even with me and my sister, as very vividly I remember Rebecca being told the time to turn the TV off once it passed a certain bed point. A dedicated wife, it didn't stop others from being very interested in my grandma, even at a later point in life. As we found out a few years ago, there was another gentleman who she had met prior to my grandfather who had written her letters over her entire lifetime, reminding her of his love for her. Though she always was faithful and loving towards my grandfather, it didn't stop others from courting her. Finally, her being a traditional woman with the flatware in the right place and making sure everyone doesn't have their elbows on the table didn't stop her from having a good time. Her favorite dinner was not at a fancy restaurant or some special meal for the holidays. It was actually Burger King, getting onion rings. I remember many times after basketball practice going there myself with her. She also was not always proper 100% of the time. We took a trip to Mexico when I was 15 in high school. And I woke up at 7:30 in the morning, as I was designated to sleep on the couch while we were there. And me and Drew were sharing the couch. And I turn over to my right, and I see Grandma Lily walking into the kitchen wearing just her nightgown. And this is at 7:30 in the morning, mind you. She grabs a bottle of wine, does not proceed to pour a glass for herself, and just swigs it. Didn't even notice I saw it. And then she went back to bed. Another great moment of this proper behavior being a little bit under the radar was when she went to lunch one day when my sister came in town, and my sister had brought her new boyfriend, who my grandma had not met yet, Ari. At lunch, as they were discussing, Ari proceeds to go to my grandma. Lil, how are your cheese fries? Are you enjoying them? Do you think they're delicious? She turns back and immediately looks at Ari and goes, "You're delicious." I want to point out really quickly that the last time I saw my grandmother, it took her, her memory was very far gone at that point, and it took her a minute to remember Rebecca, and she did, but it took a minute. It didn't take her a minute to remember Ari. So these are things that people call imperfections, but they're not. These are the things that make us human, that make us individuals, that provide us with a soul, that are representations of our soul. And even with these so-called imperfections, my grandma's involvement in all these cataclysmic moments in our history, as Americans, as Jews, and just as her family members, is a testimony to her strength of character, her strength of will, her acts of service, and her acts of love. She is an embodiment that someone who came from a modest background and lived a modest life can impact the key fixtures in what we perceive as life today. She did her part where she could and when she could. And that's why she's part of the greatest generation. Not because she was in a city at a key moment in history, or because she went to a country at a certain time and place, but because these are the choices she made when the choices weren't easy to make. Sometimes it meant donating money that she might not have had, that even to this day, we'd still get letters from places like National Wildlife Federation or from the synagogue or other locations to ask for another $20 donation. Sometimes it meant spending quality time with her children, volunteering, making sure that they had the right place to be, they had the right guidance and mentorship. Sometimes it meant just putting out an extra flag on the 4th of July and making sure she got a good spot so her grandkids could sit with her during the parade. So like all of us, Grandma Lily had her imperfections, but her choices and her actions led to a better world and a stronger family. Knowing what hurdles she faced in her life, and then knowing she still made the right choices as often as she could, reminds me that as I face my own imperfections, that having a fulfilling life in turn requires these imperfections. She will forever retain a special place in my heart. I was fortunate enough to have one final moment with her this summer, with It Was Just Us. There was something special about it, although I couldn't put my finger on it. Though her memory was fading, she still remembered the wedding ring that her mother-in-law gave to her, that she then in turn gave to me to give to my wife, Sarah. Even in her sickness and her memory loss, she still asked about the ring. She still asked about my wife and the pregnancy and how she was doing. And so yet another imperfection shows her strength. Another imperfection shows her will to overcome, even in a moment of sickness. It reminds me once more, she truly deserved the title as being a member of the greatest generation, not in spite of her so-called imperfections, but because of them. I also want to echo what Jimmy had said. I think it's without question that my grandmother's quality of life, and even life itself, may not have existed for as long as it did if it was not for the work of Agnes and, of course, of Eugene and the rest of your family, Agnes. So, thank you once more for everything you've done over the last 8 years. I think everyone here is cannot express in words our appreciation. So, that's it.
Okay. Find it. Hi everyone, and to those live streaming who don't know me, I'm Muraff, Jim's daughter. Yeah, I guess I'm gonna echo a lot of what, mine's pretty short and sweet. I think a lot has been said, a testimony to who Grandma was and who she was as a person, and all the words have been so beautiful. So yeah, so I guess I started to write while I was listening to our conversation on Zoom Thursday night with the rabbi. And I really got to learn a lot about who she is and was as a person. And I actually was like, I see a lot of her in myself and how she instilled herself in my dad to raise me. She was so independent and selfless and always wanted to give back, which we've heard from the plethora of her giving back and her acts of service. She established a life for herself and broke away from the South to truly start her own life, which was, as was said, not very common for a woman her age. I'm so thankful for all of the memories that I got to establish when I was younger and into my early teen years. And as Jeremy's story about Mexico, I actually was the one who got to share a bedroom with her, which I was very grateful for. She was always at every single show and was so supportive in the audience. And one thing I'll never forget was in September, before I went back to school, I was home for, I think, the high holidays. I went to say bye to her and before going back to school, and she held my hand, and I told her I loved her, and she said, "From me to you." And I will always remember her saying that to me. And in a recent conversation with my dad, we discussed how he never wanted me to feel like I can't do something just because I'm a female. And this mentality came from Grandma Lily and the path that she carved for herself in her life. I look up to her ambition and respect all that she did within her life. And I aspire to always have her courage and outlook on life. And I'm going to miss her eager energy so much. Rest easy, Grandma Lily, and I love you. Yeah.
So none of us compared notes on what we all said last night. We all kind of were doing our own thing, so much of this is going to be repeated, but I still feel it deserves to be said again. So how can I put into words my mother, Lilyan's incredible 96 years that she lived and the legacy that she has left for us? Each decade was a chapter, and each chapter was filled with stories, adventures that you've heard some of them, travels, connecting with people all over the world, and still has those touch points today, experiencing new possibilities for herself, from childhood through her single days to raising her own family with my father, Bernie. But most of all, dedication and undying love for her family, along with all extended family, her cousins, the Groves in Dallas, her family in Florida, and my father's family, extended family, was her greatest passion of all. And a consistent part, really, of her life's theme in everything she did. This also was combined with giving back, as you've heard, whenever she could, to others, both individuals and charities, as she always felt so blessed with her own life. This all came together with Lil's extremely modern way of thinking, pushing boundaries and doing everything her own way. She was truly a happy soul because she did do it her own way, and she was never bound to anyone else's ideas or philosophies. She had her own way of doing things, and this helped and caused her to live her best life. Born in Port Arthur, Texas, and then moving to New Orleans at a young age with her mother,
Lil's mother, Lena Pearl, wanted to be closer to her sisters, which started the whole idea of family first. Lil would tell me stories of her love for her everyday lifestyle in the South, spending Sunday mornings as a young child going down to the docks with her mother, Lena Pearl, and her uncle Arthur and Aunt Juliet to buy crawfish and shrimp from the shrimping boats, and then have big family dinners that night with her aunts and family on a Sunday night in one of their homes. She told me stories of her mother and her aunt's Southern-style cooking, jambalaya, black beans, and shrimp Dijon, along with the beignets for dessert, the fried donuts that are so famous in New Orleans. She was raised as a proper Southern lady and went to an all-girls high school, Sophie B. Wright, for girls. She loved the arts and was a part of a theater group in high school where she was in many performances. And as a side note, later in life, for her birthdays every year, as she became older and had grandchildren, she would take the entire family for her own birthday present to Broadway musicals and theater performances that were in Chicago to introduce and instill the arts and her passion to her children and to her grandchildren. Jewish life, as you've heard, was a very important aspect to Lilyan and to her family. Lil was on the leadership board for Junior Hadassah when she was younger, which supported the efforts at that time of cooperation between Jews and Arabs in what was then called Palestine, and at that time was a very contemporary thinking for this time in the world. Lil was a very modern and forward-thinking girl from the South, although from the South, as you've heard. After earning a 2-year associate's degree, Lil made a decision to pack up and make a move in her late 20s to head to Cincinnati as she received an offer to work at the Hebrew Union College Institute of Religion. Also a very forward-thinking place to work where students studied to become Reformed rabbis, a departure from the typical conservative rabbinical training at that time. After several years, however, her love of adventure led her to Chicago, where a friend of hers had moved to Waveland Avenue in the Lakeshore area, and they became roomies. After meeting my father at a Friday night social in the city, they dated and were engaged in 3 months. They married in August of 1962 in New Orleans, with Lil's family by her side. And of course, as staying with tradition with Lil, a non-traditional luncheon wedding, always keeping with things that were slightly different, and wearing a 3/4 length dress. They had me after 9 months later, and shortly after that moved to West Rogers Park, having my brother Barry and then Jim within the next 3 years. My parents then moved my grandmother from New Orleans to help with the kids and to live with them, and they both were working, and this was very helpful for our family, and we became very close with our grandmother because of this. Again, just one more asterisk to her love of family and wanting us always to be together. And then they were off to the races, so to speak. Moving to Northbrook when I was in kindergarten, they built a beautiful house in Sunset Fields and made sure we were within walking distance of our grammar school to stay close, and would always be close to my mother as she was working but had my grandmother at home. My mother became very involved, and everything revolved around what was the best experience for her kids. Lil jumped right in with her kids and loved to participate in whatever we loved. She was a Brownie Troop leader, as you've heard, Cub Scout leader for my brothers, and as Jim mentioned, was involved with everything we enjoyed. I still hear from my childhood friends all the time on how much they love to carpool, and especially this week, how they love to carpool with Lilyan, as she was so much fun to have as the driver and never was too strict with the rules in the car. Lil would tell me, as an adult, she took the greatest pleasure in hearing wild laughter in the back seat of the station wagon, and especially the ones that were in the way back, is what we call the third part of these old school station wagons, and loved hearing laughter in the house from the family room with our friends. She loved to have our house be the house that our friends could hang out at. There was always something going on at our house on Western Avenue that was loud, probably disruptive for most of our neighbors, but not for us. My brothers played the drums, as you've heard. They were in rock bands and high school band, and there was always loud music and lots of friends hanging out on Western Avenue with us. Someone was always getting into some kind of trouble. My brother running over, as you heard the story from Jeremy, my son, running over our neighbor's newly laid sod with his moped with his friends, and getting caught by the police. On several occasions, we would bring home multiple kittens from a new litter from friends down the street without asking our parents. And at a time, as you also heard, a party that I had that was supposed to be for 25 people when my parents were out of town turned into 200 people from Glenbrook North. And a few hours later, having to call the police and break up my own party before my parents got home from out of town. Our dad would really lose his temper, but not Lil. She was always accepting and would basically say, hey, great experience, just don't do it again. She was all about the experience and learning from it. She was probably the oldest mom of our friends in actual age, but by far the coolest mom in the hood. Old friends have told me stories this week of Lil's kindness that I'd never heard before, reaching out to people in times of hardship, people that Jim, Barry, and I have all known, and I had never heard this before, people that were going through personal loss or that were suffering from problems at home or going through a divorce. And she would let them know that she was there for them and to talk to them and that they could get through anything. She would encourage everyone to not let anything get in their way and just keep pushing through. You can do it, and you will get through it. This speaks to her tremendous spirit and to fight, as she did in the end as well. She continued her desire to live until the end and as long as she could, and she put up a damn good fight to the finish. Lil traveled the world, worked at tremendously interesting places, had lifelong friends living all over the U.S., has traveled to other countries, such as Israel, and has friends in Australia, lived both a southern proper life and an exciting city life, and then back to suburbia. She lived through both, as you've heard, the Great Depression and the Greatest Generation, and so much more. And in the end, it was her heart of gold, her zest for eating up life at every opportunity, her charity, altruism, and most importantly, her pure, solid, undying love for her 3 children, myself, Barry, and Jimmy, and family. And that will be her legacy that will be left behind when we think of our mother. Myself and my 2 brothers are who we are today as we have been raised the best possible way, with compassion, open-minded acceptance, and we have been taught respect for others, to work hard, and for what you strive for, and love hard the ones that are most dear to you. As my mom and I would always say to each other, and her last words to me the day before she passed, see you later, alligator, after a while, crocodile. And of course, as my kids both know, her famous line of all, to all of us, we would say, I love you, Mom, and she would always say and respond, me too, you. Lil, me too, you, Mom, forever and always.
What can I add to that? You guys have said such wonderful things about our wonderful mother. She was the salt of the earth. She was our best of friends, and you really honored her with your words, and I'm so impressed and so grateful. And I'm just going to say a few random things here. I don't have anything organized. Didn't sleep so well. A few things that my brother and sister might not know. I used to sing to my mom. She was pretty good with computers, but she didn't really have a smartphone as she aged, and she was amazed that I could talk into my phone and pull up songs and instantaneously, whatever song that she requested. It was a lot of things like musicals, West Side Story and Guys and Dolls songs particularly, and she loved Billy Joel. I took her to a Billy Joel concert many years ago that she always remembers, and her favorite song is of his is my life. And even though this is taken a little bit out of context, to help comfort me, a couple of the words of that song that we all know are, I don't need you to worry for me because I'm all right. And then he says a little later, go ahead with your own life. So because I sang that song to my mother so much, I feel like she's singing it with me and telling me that she's in a better place and to go on with my life and to make her proud. And she would always say to me, one thing I liked about her Alzheimer's was she repeated a lot of the same things over. I didn't like a lot of the same questions. Where do you work? When have you seen Jimmy last? When have you seen Laura? When have you seen Lisa? But she would always say to me, you're such a good son. You know, sometimes I would feed her and she would say, this is delicious. You're such a good son. Or just for visiting her, I'd visit her 2 to 3 times a week. And so that helped me to be encouraged for her to always say that to me. A couple stories that are kind of quirky that helped me learn some things and appreciate how sacrificial my mother was. Just a couple quick ones. One of them was we had a maid from a Polish maid service for a long time. I think it was only like once a month, so that maid did a lot of work once a month. That would help my mom. I would help a little bit too, but she was cleaning my room one day, and we noticed that I figured out that she had been taking money, whether it was from my wallet or from the desktop, because she was walking around with a little garbage can in her hand, and I wanted to pick something up the floor myself, and I said, can I have it? She wouldn't give it to me, and I thought maybe her English wasn't so good. So I grabbed it, and I noticed there was some crumbled up $20 bills and a couple of $5 bills, and so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, our maid's been stealing from us. So you would naturally think that my mom would call the maid service and have her fired. She did not. Apparently my mom forgave her. She told her to never do it again. The maid worked for a few more months and then went back to Poland. And so that taught me a couple of things. It taught me to be more forgiving and more understanding, and also to organize my stuff a little better and not leave it lying around and things like that. Because my mom was very organized, extremely organized. Then another story of sacrificial love, real quick, is that when I was finishing up NIU, I think it was the final semester and the final week, and I had a professor that was, he assigned everybody, it was a really easy assignment, to take a few articles. It was Middle Age history, or history of the Middle Ages, I should say. And he assigned everyone in the class to do a synopsis of various articles on the Middle Ages in this journal, and he was really doing it for himself so he could have a file of thousands of articles and just read a quick synopsis, like the cliff notes of the detailed stories. So I had talked to my mom on the phone that I'd have an extremely busy week. It's going to be hard to finish up things. I might even have to get an extension in this and not graduate in time. She asked me if she could help. Believe it or not, somehow she volunteered, and I said, no, don't do that. That's ridiculous. She volunteered to come down to school and help me. We found a place in like a private library, and it wasn't the student center. It was a private building, some religious, the Judson Center. It was a church, a basement or something where they had. She came down with my dad, and she actually did a synopsis. She helped me do a synopsis. She typed it up of 3 of these papers. I probably shouldn't be admitting this, but that helped me get my diploma because I was busy trying to finish up other classes there. She actually, her and my dad did the synopsis of like 3 of the, I might have helped a little bit, I can't recall, but I think she did the whole thing. She typed like 80 words a minute, and believe it or not, even though word processors and computers were being used plenty in the late 80s, she used her old typewriter. She could type like 80 words a minute. The professor was probably surprised that there was some typos where she crossed things out in an old typewriter because everybody else was using computers. And it reminded me of that scene in the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield where he gets his college degree. He's like in his 50s and he goes back to school. He has to do one of his assignments was to do a synopsis of a a famous book, I believe, written by Isaac Asimov or Kurt Vonnegut. Thank you, Kurt Vonnegut. Thank you. And so he actually, because he's rich in the movie, his son's also going to school there, he hires Kurt Vonnegut to do the synopsis because he's busy like me. He's working on stuff for other classes where he has tutors. So he just hires someone to do that assignment, and it happens to be the guy who wrote the book. And the guy ends up getting a C. The guy ends up getting a C, so he fires Kurt Vonnegut. He gets a C, the guy who actually wrote the book and who did a synopsis. Anyway, my mom and I got an A+ in these papers, or my mom did. Helped me graduate, helped me get my diploma, so I have to give her some credit for that. So other than that, my mom lived a glorious life, just incredibly fruitful, and just incredible blessing to have a mother like that. I mean, it's got to be so rare. I mean, always there for us, and we almost lost her 5-6 years ago. So we really had her on borrowed time here. We really did. I mean, we all thought, even I wasn't sure. I had a lot of friends praying for her at church and things like that, but still, I wasn't sure she was going to make it. And my gosh, we had her another 6 years. I almost feel like it's selfish for me to be so mournful and so tearful the last few days. I feel like it's selfish. But so anyway, because I can't think of much more to say, I'm just going to read something. It's not that I'm lazy. I'm just very emotional. Just the same thing. I think these words are appropriate for her. I read some of them at my dad's funeral, even more appropriate for my mom, and I think they're the perfect words for both my mother as well as to help comfort others, and they were written by the greatest of rabbis. I wasn't the perfect son, but my mom said I was great. There's about a quarter of this world believes that there was only one perfect son, and this is part of the Sermon on the Mount that he did 2,000 years ago. Very close to some of these stones, which I believe probably represent the Second Temple in Jerusalem. So I believe these words characterize my mother, and hopefully that they'll be helpful to somebody here. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the humble, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Again, you have heard it said that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. And you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I shall tell you not to resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him also have your cloak. Whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn him away. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. And I just want to express my gratitude to God for giving me and my family such a beautiful creation of God, a beautiful creation of the great carpenter of the universe, who who walked this earth a couple thousand years ago to teach us such amazing things.
Thank you all for those beautiful, beautiful tributes and sharing all of those amazing memories. And our tradition really teaches that that's the way we remember the people who have passed away. It's how we carry them with us. It's one way that they live on with us, and it's how we carry them with us when we recollect their lives. Every time we recollect their lives, we honor them, and we bring them with us. And we'll remember Lilyan really for all of the life that we were able to share with her while she was here with us, and really for the incredible legacy that she leaves behind, which will serve as a guide, a beacon, and an inspiration. I'll invite you to please rise as we move toward our concluding prayer for our time here together. El Malay Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamatzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina, Im Kedoshim Utahorim, Kezoar Harakia Mazirim, Et Yakirenu Shel Chale Olama, Baal Harachamim, Yastir Habaseter Knafecha Leolamim, Vitzor Bitzor Chaim Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalata, V'tanuach B'Shalom Amishkava V'Nomar, Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our Lilyan, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace always. We say together, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the service here in the chapel. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights on and hazard lights on at all times. Memorial contributions in her memory to North Shore Congregation Israel would be appreciated, or to your favorite charity. For those of you who are here, that information is on your service folder. For those of you who are online, that information is on our website. This time I invite everyone to please rise and stand in place as we escort her casket from the chapel, then you may return to your cars. Ladies and gentlemen,